From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The clock is ticking on the 2024 legislative session with just 1 week of regular work left. Among the bills still getting pressure for action, one that would change the use of prone positions by police on Kansas teens after the death of Cedric Lofton. Plus, a brewing fight between the House and the Senate over dueling tax relief plans after the House reaches a compromise that gets everyone in that chamber on board. But first, the latest bid to legalize medical marijuana fails as supporters of legalization say it's not good enough. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. It was another swing and a miss for state lawmakers looking to legalize medical marijuana. This time, some supporters brought forward a proposal for a temporary pilot program just to show how legalization would work, only to have fellow supporters complain this new limited legalization idea was just too limited. As Rebecca Chung of the KSN Capitol Bureau shows us, opponents were perfectly happy to put off the debate for another session.
Yeah, a 2-hour hearing here at the State House ending in disappointment for some advocates who touted the restrictions in this plan. Remember, that was a big selling point to get GOP leaders on board. The Republicans say they're standing by their decision to table this bill. Now, just some of the issues that were raised during the hearing include the potential for organized crime. Some opponents are also questioning the medical benefits, arguing that higher levels of THC could cause psychosis. Industry advocates are also speaking out against this bill. They claim that it would create a monopoly with its restrictions on licensing. The state would only be allowed to contract with 4 operators at any one time. All of this led up to senators killing the bill this session. Republicans on the Senate Fed and State Committee voted to table it until 2025. Now, I spoke with the chair of the committee and asked whether a compromise can be reached on this issue and whether any bill would be conservative enough to make it to the floor.
Everyone I've seen, they try to put liabilities from immunity in for physicians who prescribe. This one even has immunity from liability for workman's comp. I've not seen an attempt to tightly regulate. I think in every one of these efforts, it's just an attempt to get the camel's nose under the tent and open the door to legalize marijuana for the state. There were police officers up there saying that this was going to cause Chinese cartels to come in and take over the state. That's not true. None of these things are true. The argument against medical cannabis is one of fear and ignorance. And this bill was crafted to be as restrictive as possible, but that still wasn't enough to get it over the line.
Yeah, that was Sam Jones, Chief Operating Officer of Kansas Natural Remedies. It's a hemp producer based in Wichita that helped craft this plan. He says it's back to the drawing board for his team. They're going to regroup and see what they can come up with next year. Now, Republican leaders say they're setting a high bar for marijuana bills here at the State House, but it's unclear whether we'll actually see a vote on this issue in the future. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And joining us this week to break down this and other topics, we've got Gabrielle Jones of Healing and Harmony Therapy, Dalton Glasscock, former Cedric County Republican Party Chair, and State Senator Aletha Faust-Goudeau, a Wichita Democrat. Welcome to all of you. And Aletha, I'm going to start with you. You were on that hearing, or on that committee at that hearing. And I know that almost as soon as that bill was introduced, I was hearing folks who had some serious concerns about it. What about you? Were you hearing from the public about this at all?
Well, absolutely. You know, this is an issue that's been going on for a long time. Actually, there's been about 52 different pieces of legislation to enact medical marijuana here in the state of Kansas. And then we remember our dear friend, Representative Gail Finney, who introduced one of the first pieces of legislation because she has lupus, and she actually said that it helped her pain. And so there's the ones that are advocates because it said it does relieve their pain. However, my colleagues on the Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee that heard the bill yesterday, Senate Bill 555, they feel that it would lead to recreational use. And so on just the day before, on Tuesday, someone else came in, actually Kevin Barone came in and introduced another bill on medical marijuana. So here's the thing. We still have both sides proponents and opponents, but at the end of the day, I believe eventually it's going to pass. Eventually, maybe not this session, but eventually it will.
Yeah, because this bill was tabled until the opening of next year's session. But at the same time, we know, I mean, there have been multiple surveys and studies that most Kansans support at least legalizing medical marijuana.
And we should. And I really think opponents of this are driven by fear. They're driven by untruths through this process. A majority of Kansans, a majority of Republicans support legalization, and maybe not a majority of the Republicans elected, but a majority of the electorate supports legalization, and we need to move towards that. It's well past time. 40 states have already some form of legalization, 24 have recreational, and on top of that, there's 16 that have some form of medicinal marijuana, and it's long past. Like Representative Finney, I have ulcerative colitis, and it's often used to treat that. My grandmother had Parkinson's. It's often used to treat that, and it is well past time that we pass this as a state. I don't think today's bill went far enough. I do think a pilot program is a good first step, but we need full legalization of medical marijuana, and we need to do it yesterday and not try to delay it to 2025.
Hey, I know, Gabrielle, when I was listening to this hearing, one of the concerns that was raised by the KBI director is he said that there are studies connecting increases in mental illness of youth to marijuana use. You work with therapy programs. Have you heard of those?
I would say yes, to a certain extent. Just like any other substance, marijuana can lead to addiction, and although it can, that doesn't mean it has to. So I would say on the medical marijuana piece of it, I would be in agreement with that, just because I know the pros that it does have for those in pain and for those who can benefit from it. Although it would need to be monitored for any other use when it comes to youth. That's something that I just can't understand because of the impacts that it could have on the brain development. Our brains don't stop developing, until 26. So if we think about youth to 26 and you're using any form of substance, you're going to delay the brain and how you see things and how your worldview is impacted. So,
And Pilar, what I think it needs to happen is, as opposed to individuals trying to take the ownership of this is my bill, all those entities need to come together. The pharmacists, the physicians, the lawmakers, the cultivators, all of them need to come together and kind of put a bill that will work, because I do believe that it relieves that pain. I do believe that having the control over it would prevent some of the things that you just shared. And so again, it's just like other pieces of legislation. You introduce a bill maybe 5 years in a row and finally it happens.
Well, you're talking about everybody getting together and kind of throwing it all on the table and picking out what works and what doesn't. We kind of saw that happen in the House this last week. Political jousting, though, between the Kansas House and Senate is on over exactly the issue that they were compromising on: how much the state will tax the money you earn. A bill the House passed unanimously, which, by the way, is something I have not seen in my over a decade of covering the Kansas State House, lowered rates for every bracket and taken out state income tax altogether for the lowest earners. But as KSN's Rebecca Chung shows us, the Senate president put a halt on the movement of that House bill.
Yeah, quite the setback for that House bill. I spoke with the chair of the Senate Tax Committee, and she says she's hoping to reach a compromise on tax relief in a conference committee. Remember earlier, we did say that a tax relief plan would have to go to conference. Right now, she says there are some bills that lawmakers are able to negotiate to create a final plan. The Kansas Senate sent the House's tax plan to the Senate Tax Committee, but committees can't meet without permission from the Senate president. This essentially takes their tax plan out of the question. It's a blow to the House for sure, but parts of the bill could still potentially come up during negotiations. Here's what the Senate tax chair had to say when I asked about next steps.
What's going to happen is we have two other bills that are conferenceable from the House. They're House bills, and I'm sure that we'll get a Senate bill or two that we can conference on also. So hopefully there'll be negotiations between the two chambers.
Now, the Senate has a bill that it's already worked on as well. That one passed earlier this month, 29-11. It would set the state to a single rate income tax, but it includes a gradual decrease over several years. We could see parts of this come up during negotiations as well. Now, we will be tracking what happens next week. Drop Dead Day, the final day to consider bills, is coming up here April 5th, and that's a tight turnaround for tax relief. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
She took some of the words right out of my mouth. A tight turnaround for tax relief there. 1 week left to get it done. And we had a bill. It was definitely a compromise bill. Adam Smith, State Representative Adam Smith, who kind of spearheaded this, when they passed it out of committee with a recommendation of passage in the full House, he made the comment that really stuck with me. It's a compromise. Everybody's walking out of here frustrated, and that's the way it should be. Nobody should walk out of a compromise happy. But it seems like the fight is coming down to one issue, which is the form of taxing in Kansas, flat tax or multiple brackets.
And I mean, you look at it, it is a compromise bill. Again, nobody's happy, and that's how our process of government should work. When we have a divided House, we have to be able to make compromise, to be able to have good bill. And this wasn't actually even a compromise. When you have 125 people say yes to something, I mean, that's 123. Yes, I guess there were 2 gone. When you have that many people walk away from something and are willing to say, hey, I'm maybe not 100% excited about this, but I'm willing to lean in, we should be able to reflect that on the Senate side. I hope the House and Senate can work together on another compromise solution. Maybe we can have a unanimous vote in the Senate as well, which would be a huge testament, I think, to citizens of the state, is that they don't want to see infighting. They want to see work done. They want to see good results. And they also want to see a tax bracket that's fair to all citizens. And so I hope that the Senate can also come to the same conclusion as the House and not delay this when Kansans don't want bickering at the State House.
Well, I'll tell you what, so when we over in the Senate heard what they were doing over in the House, we all gasped. We couldn't believe it. And so absolutely, like Senator Karen Tyson just stated, is that what's going to have to happen is it's going to come, an agreement must be made by law. We've got to do something during that conference committee. So you're going to have 3 representatives on one side of the table from the tax committee in the House, and then 3 senators from the tax committee in the Senate. And they're going to negotiate and come up with something that will work, that we can pass into law. But the flat tax, that's a no. That's a no. The governor has said if that bill passes, she will veto it. So we do need to get to work next week and come up with something that will benefit all people. I really care about those who are struggling and can barely put food on the table. So we have to come up with something that's fair and just for all Kansans.
I think that's very important, especially as a small business owner myself. I would love to know how that would impact myself and other people in the communities and what's in the best interest, because we kind of hit hard with taxes, especially around this time of year. So I would love to see what's in the best interest of those.
Speaking of taxes, though, I want to share Senate Bill 435 is moving its way through the legislative process. A bill that I introduced that would eliminate the sales tax on feminine products, baby diapers, and adult diapers.
Okay. All right. We'll have to keep our eye on that one, definitely. Well, moving on, it has been more than 2 years since 17-year-old Cedric Lofton died while being restrained and held in custody in Sedgwick County. This week, lawmakers made a last-minute effort to revive a bill to change how Kansas law enforcement can restrain teens. KSN's Craig Andrus explains.
After being restrained in custody for more than half an hour in 2021, Cedric Lofton became unresponsive. He was later pronounced dead.
I feel what should be done is, the obvious answer. I feel like the position has been known to be deadly. And
Cedric Lofton's brother, Marquand, is hopeful the so-called prone position should not be used on teens, and he's hopeful lawmakers can make the technique off limits for use on teens.
This legislation would actually be statewide.
State Senator Aletha Faust-Godot offered up the Senate Bill 504 to make the use of prone position off limits for officers dealing with teens, but some lawmakers say time is running out for the bill that did not get a hearing for debate.
But to a layperson, it seems obvious that you should not hold a child in a prone position on the ground for 30 minutes.
Representative Carmichael would still like to see Senate Bill 504 get moving, but the session in Topeka is nearing completion, so the bill would have to be attached to a different bill to still make it happen. As for some family of Cedric Lofton, they do not hold high hopes it will happen this year.
For just natural common sense that they would, but apparently common sense isn't enough.
Here for you, Craig Andrus, KSN News 3.
And looking at just the psychology of this, dealing with somebody who's dealing with a mental health break, trying to calm them down by holding them down in a prone position, to me, just does not seem like something that would work.
No, it doesn't. It actually defeats the purpose, especially when we're triggered, when our lids are flipped. You're not going to accomplish what you're doing, and that's trying to emotionally regulate yourself. There are so many other ways and tactics to go about doing that, between using 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, talking to them, calmly understanding what they're dealing with. I think putting your hands on someone in that position is just an absolute no. Like, it does more damage, and it's really hurtful. So.
But just like with the tax, we are looking at that 1 week left to get this done. What does it look like as far as getting it through the Senate and House?
Senate Bill 504, I do know that a couple of senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee, they are looking at a way to amend that bill into another bill, perhaps in their committee. These two senators are lawyers. And so they definitely understand the situation. And I want to take this opportunity to commend the group here in Wichita, who have just been steadfast on advocacy for justice for Cedric Lofton. And there is a Facebook page called 39, meaning the 39 minutes that Cedric Lofton was wrapped up in the prone position. And I'm going to give you an example. That's like wrapped up like a burrito. Wow. And he was face down. We later found out in a hearing in Topeka, where Cedric County commissioners presented some of the recommendations from the task force after Cedric Lofton's death. And we did find out that he had COVID. So that makes it even harder to breathe. Even on the state level, when we visit our state prisons, they do their prone position a little differently. This legislation, Senate Bill 504, all it's asking is that we use the other methods of restraints. Okay. There are other ways to do this, or to keep a person upright, not on their stomach, but on their back perhaps for a less amount of time, as opposed to 39 minutes with officers on you. And then you have to consider their medical condition, their mental condition. You have to consider their weight, height, and size. But just imagine, me, I couldn't do it, I'm claustrophobic, to be wrapped up like a burrito.
It's invoking fear. It's invoking a negative connotation of those around them, and ultimately they have a goal in mind. They're not going to reach that goal of getting through to any youth or anybody with constant excessive force when it comes to that specific.
And his brother Marquand, he's been at the Capitol almost every day this session. He was just there the other day. Wow. And with his daughter, who would be the niece to Cedric Lofton. Yeah. And he's such a wonderful young man. And when he, you can see the sadness in his face, and he hasn't given up. He wants something, some legislation to make his brother's life to have meant something.
I would too.
And those videos are incredibly hard to watch, I think, for anybody that watches them. I think, fortunately, law enforcement are figuring out ways to better address mental health crises and figure out how they can also handle situations differently when they evoke. And I hope that we continue to move that as a community to make sure that we're seeing each individual as unique, each individual handles and processes things differently, and how do we create better outcomes.
And Councilman, you can help with that for sure. I know that we don't have enough crisis centers for those with mental issues, our youth to go to. We did find out that over at St. Joseph, those beds were full. So what do you do with our young people in those situations? And so, the advocacy from the city and the county for the mental health facility, that would be huge. we've got to work on that to get that funding.
Well, and the new mental health hospital in Cedric County is not only going to benefit citizens of Cedric County and the South Central region, it's going to benefit the entire state because this is a statewide issue. And right now we're sending our residents up to Osawatomie and other facilities, and so hopefully that takes the burden from the rest of the state, where people that are in crisis can get the help that they need as well.
Right, absolutely.
An incredibly important topic. Lots we could say on it, lots we have said throughout the history of this show. We have other things we want to talk about as well today. Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach is leading the charge against President Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. As he announced Thursday, he's suing the president. Rebecca Chong with the KSN Capitol Bureau once again. Kobach announced the move at the State House Thursday afternoon. He blasted the president's decision to move forward with his student loan repayment plan. Kobach says the lawsuit was filed in federal district court in Topeka shortly before he made the announcement. 11 states, including Kansas, are joining in the lawsuit, and they argue Biden is overstepping his authority. The president's latest plan is set to provide a faster path to cancellation and lower monthly payments for millions of borrowers. Republicans say this new plan is essentially the same as Biden's first attempt to cancel student loans, which the Supreme Court struck down last year.
It forces taxpayers, including people who did not go to college because they couldn't afford it, and people who worked their way through college, and people who saved money and then went to college. It forces them to pay for the student loans of those who ran up exorbitant student debt.
Biden's plan is supposed to be phased in this year. The quicker path to cancellation was set to start later this summer, but the administration already started canceling loans for some people last month. As for how long this new lawsuit could take to play out, Kobach says it's highly unlikely this would get to the Supreme Court before the end of the year, but it could be possible. He said they could go to the Supreme Court emergency docket. And according to the Biden administration, I want to get these numbers right, this impacts a little over 1,200 Kansans at a cost of just under $10 million for Kansas alone. And those are individual peoples who have big checks that they have to write every month. And you were saying, Gabrielle, you're one of them.
Yes, absolutely. And the lack of forgiveness, and I worked my way through college. I did all of the things that he was talking about, and I still have an ungodly amount of student loan debt that I'm currently working, and I've built a business to help sustain and pay those off. But unfortunately, when you have a student loan payment that is in the thousands, it's along with other things that are impacting you with inflation and how expensive everything is today. With interest accruing, the odds of me paying those off is slim to none. So I think forgiveness for myself and anybody else is needed.
I think Republicans and Democrats agree that we have a student loan crisis. I do disagree with President Biden, and I don't think that forgiveness is the option or is the outcome that we need. The Supreme Court has determined this, and whether or not we agree with the decision, I do believe the Supreme Court has determined it. Now, in terms of Kobach suing President Biden for it, I think it's probably a frivolous lawsuit, and I don't understand necessarily the need for it. And so I think we could probably have our Attorney General spend time in a different way for this. However, I don't think student forgiveness, I'm fortunate that I was able to pay off my student loans this year, and it was a lot of work, and I know there are people that have far more debt than I do. And I do realize there is a crisis. We need to figure out a solution and figure out a way, whether it's the interest question and how can we eliminate interest or make it as low interest as possible to make sure that people aren't incurring more debt just because they have debt. I think that's a solution that we should work together on. And maybe maybe Washington, D.C. can take the Kansas House perspective and try to have a compromise solution.
Oh, you're aiming high
there.
Yes,
we'll see. I'm an optimist.
So I've got to say this. I think when you are the president of the United States of America, you have to look at all areas to try to help all people in certain situations. I know that without the help that the President Biden is offering, some people will never come to be able to live that American dream and have those opportunities. And I would say that we have to remember to help the least of them. And we can do that. To whom much is given, much is required. And if without that relief, it's a dull future for some of those students.
At this rate, some of us will never. My goal is to own a home. And with this crisis, I don't know if that, with how things are going right now, God can do all things, but it just seems so far-fetched right now.
All right. Well, certainly a discussion we're not going to solve here. That's definitely a national issue. Finally today, state lawmakers and the Wichita City Council are hoping to give renters more protection against landlords who refuse to fix major issues. It's been nearly a year since Cake first told you about Emery Gardens Apartments in South Wichita, where people are living in filth. As Cake's Jocelyn Schifferdecker shows us, both city and state officials are working on new ordinances to give tenants more protection and say, if you're dealing with any issues, let them know.
The bugs crawling on the wall, the water damage, it's terrible.
State Representative Cindy Howerton was shocked to see the conditions some renters are living in at Emery Gardens Apartments in South Wichita. As a representative for Wichita, she wants to help.
Everybody should have that. This is America. We should have good livable conditions.
She says under current law, the conditions at Emery Gardens falls under local government. But she'd like to talk to anyone dealing with unlivable conditions to possibly come up with a bill that would give renters more protection.
Would that even be something that you could do as soon as like next legislative session if they reached out to you?
Yes. That is something we can work on this summer or this fall and get some bills drafted so that when we open in January, we can immediately introduce that legislation.
Since last spring, Cake News has been showing you the living conditions at Emery Gardens. Renters with kids are living with mold, leaky pipes, bugs, and even dead animals. The landlord says he'll fix everything, but little has been done. Meanwhile, Wichita City Council member Mike Hoheisel says the council has been working to give renters more protection in situations like these.
It's especially appalling when you see it in your own community.
And it's not going to stop.
We did pass the Landlord Retaliation Act here a couple of months ago. That was to ensure that people can report these violations and not have fear of retaliation with us.
He expects the council to bring in more quality of life ordinances within the next year, mentioning one specifically that would cover black mold.
It is dangerous to especially children and disabled people and elderly people, so we need to make sure those issues are taken care of responsibly as fast as possible.
It's horrific, and I will be reaching out to Representative Howerton to figure out a way the city can work well with our state partners. I've already reached out to Councilman Hoheisel, my colleague, to try to figure this out. Nobody should live in these conditions, and this is not the first time the Emery Garden has had these problems. It's a repetitive action, and it shows, I think, their care in this process, and the city will be looking at this.
And you know, in the state level, you know, I've kind of talked about this to lobbyists of what we can do to help. It's going to come down to landlord and tenant laws to kind of do something to help address this issue. But I wonder, mold, would that actually affect your mental state of mind of the youth we're talking about?
That, asthma and everything. I think anything is
We're going to have
infected.
to leave that there. We are out of time. Thanks again so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion as well. We want to thank our news partners. So stay safe and have a great week.